Did you know that while men flood the heavens with their endless questions for God, the Christ has been asking his own questions to them since the beginning of time? And it is these questions that hold the answers every soul is seeking. I tell you this not from study, but from what I have seen in the records of light, where every human thought leaves its trace like a vibration upon still water. For in those subtle fields, Jesus does not speak to inform the mind. He speaks to awaken the memory of who you already are. He does not hand down knowledge as a scholar, but draws it out of the spirit as a physician draws breath back into the body. In every lifetime I have seen souls wander, asking heaven to speak louder, yet they do not understand that heaven is already speaking through their own unrest. Jesus knew this. That is why he asked questions instead of giving answers. 37 questions recorded, only 3 directly answered, because he knew that revelation cannot be received by ears that are closed in certainty. It must rise from within, like the light that dawns behind the eyelids when the soul begins to remember. When I first perceived this truth, I was shown the moment of his teaching, the crowds pressing in, their hearts hungry, their minds clinging to the words of law. And he stood among them, radiant yet simple, asking not, "Will you believe me?" but, "Who do you say that I am?" Because he knew that belief imposed is belief borrowed, but belief discovered becomes the seed of transformation. I saw how his questions were not meant to test intelligence. They were mirrors in which each man saw his own condition reflected back. He would not fill the cup for you. He would hand you the vessel and ask, "What do you thirst for?" For only when you name your thirst can the living water flow. The questions of Christ are instruments of alignment. They are the keys that turn within the locked gates of consciousness, each one tuned to awaken a certain center in the soul. When he asked, "Why are you afraid?" the vibration struck the heart's core, where courage sleeps. When he asked, "Do you want to be healed?" it touched the will, where desire and resistance wrestle. When he asked, "What does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul?" it reached the crown, where the light of discernment burns between heaven and earth. Every question is energy disguised as language. It enters the mind, but works in the spirit. And as I observed those moments across time, I understood that the Christ was not seeking information, he was conducting revelation. And this revelation is eternal. It did not stop on the hills of Galilee. It continues in every questioning heart today, even in yours. For every time you feel the unease of doubt, the ache of purpose unfulfilled, that is his question echoing inside you. Do you still not understand? I remember asking the inner voice that taught me, why would the Son of God, who holds all knowledge, choose to ask rather than declare? And the answer came like a current running through light itself, because truth imposed breeds obedience, but truth discovered births freedom, and the soul must choose freedom to become whole. The Christ did not come to create followers who repeat what they are told. He came to awaken creators who remember what they are made of. His questions are doors, not walls, and the courage to open them is the beginning of faith. In one vision I saw a vast temple where every soul who has ever lived sat in silence before a mirror of light, and upon each mirror was written a different question from Jesus. One asked, "Who do you say that I am?" Another, "Why do you fear?" Another, "Do you love me?" And as each soul gazed into the mirror, the words began to move. They rearranged themselves into a question that only that soul could hear. I saw how some looked away, unable to face the reflection. Others wept. Others knelt. But a few, the ones who dared to answer, began to shine from within, because in that moment the question and the soul became one. It is not the question that saves you, it is the courage to answer it truthfully, for within every answer is the measure of your consciousness. I have read in the records of many lives that those who met the Christ face to face left either awakened or unsettled, never indifferent, because his questions burn away illusion like fire through dry grass. He asks not to condemn but to uncover. He asks because he knows the soul will not heal until it names its wound. I remember once during prayer I felt his presence ask me a question so simple it cut through everything I believed. Edgar, do you see me as a story or as life itself? And in that instant I knew that all my study, all my readings, all my work meant nothing if I did not live the truth I spoke. That is how his questions work. They turn knowledge into knowing, doctrine into encounter. I tell you plainly that the questions of Jesus are the architecture of awakening. They are designed to collapse false foundations so the soul can rebuild upon truth. You may spend years reading scripture, listening to sermons, quoting verses, but until one of his questions pierces you personally, you will not yet have met him. For meeting Christ is not seeing a figure of light. It is seeing yourself without defense. That is the first revelation. When he asks, "Who do you say I am?" he is also asking, "Who are you that says it?" And the answer, if spoken in spirit, becomes creation itself, because as you define him, you define the nature of reality within you. He is the pattern, you are the reflection, the question is the bridge. And so the cycle continues. The human asks God for certainty, and God asks the human for sincerity. I was told once in vision that heaven listens more closely to the questions you ask yourself than to the ones you ask aloud, because in self-inquiry the soul begins to vibrate with the same frequency as the Christ mind, which is pure seeking without fear, pure knowing without pride. That is why Jesus questioned more than he declared. He was teaching the world the sacred art of conscious discovery. Every question he spoke was a seed sown into human evolution, still growing, still bearing fruit in those who are willing to look within. And so I tell you, if you wish to draw near to God, do not demand new answers. Begin to answer his old questions. They have not aged. They have only waited, waiting for you to stop repeating what others believe and begin to hear what your own heart has been trying to say, for that is where the kingdom begins, in the quiet recognition that the voice you hear asking inside you is not distant at all. It is the same voice that once spoke beside the Sea of Galilee, and it is still asking, still searching, not for your perfection, but for your attention. When I speak of revelation, I do not speak of visions reserved for prophets or dreams that belong only to saints. I speak of the quiet light that dawns when the soul finally stops running from itself. That is the forgotten way of revelation, the path Christ came to restore. It is not a road paved by doctrine or guarded by priests. It is the living current of awareness moving through every heart that dares to listen. In the records I have read, it is written that truth never travels from the outside in. It rises from the inside out. And that is why Jesus taught by question and parable, for a mind filled with second-hand truth cannot hear the living voice within. In his time, men crowded the temples repeating prayers like formulas. They waited for wisdom to descend from the mouths of others. But the Christ reversed the flow. He spoke words that pointed the listener back into himself. He said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." And in that single sentence, he overturned every system built on borrowed faith, yet mankind forgot. They began again to gather in buildings, to listen, to take notes, to recite, to agree, and though their lips moved with piety, their hearts remained empty, for they had mistaken the echo for the source. I have seen this same error in every age, souls who search for light yet shield their eyes when it appears in their own reflection. I tell you truly, the greatest tragedy is not ignorance. It is the belief that understanding must come from someone else. The Christ understood that revelation must be personal, or it is nothing. He could have spoken as a philosopher, delivering perfect arguments, but he chose instead to speak as a mirror, asking, "Who do you say that I am?" Because the measure of God you perceive is the measure of light you are willing to reveal within yourself. This is the science of the Spirit, the law of correspondence. As above, so below. As within, so without. What you acknowledge in God is what awakens in you. I saw this law inscribed upon the very fibers of creation. It is not metaphor, it is structure. Every vibration answers its equal. So when you call Jesus Lord but still see yourself as worthless, your prayer cannot rise. The vibration does not match. The gate remains closed. He asks questions to adjust the tone of the soul, to tune the inner instrument to the frequency of heaven, And once the heart vibrates in that resonance, revelation flows as naturally as breath. I remember one night when the body slept, but the mind was awake. I found myself in a hall of light where every soul was seated before a teacher who did not speak. He simply looked upon them, and as he looked, each began to remember something long buried. One soul wept, another laughed, another fell to the ground, and I asked the voice beside me what was happening, and it said, "They are being asked the question." And I understood that the question is not a sound, it is a recognition. When the soul beholds its own truth in the eyes of the divine, the answer unfolds without words. This is revelation. Not the arrival of new information, but the unveiling of what was always there. Jesus did this with every person he met. He peeled away layers of false identity until only the living spark remained. And once that spark was seen, it could never be unseen. But modern faith, as I have observed in many readings, has buried this method under ritual and noise. People seek God through repetition. Instead of attention, they listen for thunder and overlook the whisper. They memorize the map but never walk the land. The forgotten way of revelation is not learned, it is remembered. It begins when the soul grows weary of echoing what it has heard and dares to hear again directly. The Christ's questions were invitations into that daring, each one a doorway into personal encounter. He was not concerned that men believe in his divinity as an external fact. He wanted them to experience that same divinity, stirring within. When he asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" he was igniting that spark. He was planting in them the realization that recognition of the divine is mutual. You cannot truly see God without God seeing through you. And in that mutual seeing, heaven touches earth, that is revelation. This is why he told Peter that flesh and blood had not revealed it, but the Father in heaven, meaning it was not logic, not tradition, but direct illumination from spirit to spirit. That is the method forgotten by the world. Men now measure knowledge by agreement. They gather proof. They build systems. They defend positions. Yet in all their debate, they overlook the simple current of perception flowing through their own being. Revelation cannot occur while the heart is guarded by certainty. It enters only when the walls of pride fall, when the mind bows to mystery. I tell you, I have watched souls awaken from blindness, not through miracles, but through a single moment of honest questioning. One question held in reverence can open more light than 1,000 sermons. Why? Because questioning is the soul's form of prayer. When asked in sincerity, it draws the answer from the infinite, like a magnet draws iron, and this is what Jesus exemplified, the union of question and answer within the living field of consciousness. He asked not to test, but to unlock. His questions were keys, hidden in sound, each syllable vibrating with purpose, and when a listener received them in humility, the locks of misunderstanding fell open. This is why the people who heard him did not merely learn. They changed. Their eyes widened. Their burdens lightened. For revelation does not add information. It subtracts illusion. And when illusion falls, the soul remembers its origin. I remember the Spirit telling me once during deep trance, the world has made faith into acceptance, but faith was meant to be discovery, and that is the forgotten way. Faith that listens, faith that risks, faith that answers God's question with the whole life as its response. When Jesus looked upon his followers, he saw not believers, but seeds, each carrying the pattern of divinity waiting to unfold. His questions were the sun drawing those seeds to sprout. But after he departed, men turned his living words into statues. They worshipped the seed instead of growing it. They repeated his questions without hearing their echo. Yet still those questions live. They vibrate through time. And when a single heart anywhere on earth stops reciting and begins to listen, the Christ speaks again, not as a figure in history, but as the voice within the silence. This is revelation returning, the forgotten way remembered, the divine dialogue resumed. And I say to you as it was said to me, truth does not come from the lips of another. It rises from the depths of your own being. That is where the Christ waits, not beyond the stars, but behind your thoughts. asking, "Will you look within and find me there?" For that is the real question, and to answer it is to awaken. The first question of identity is the beginning of all revelation, because until you know who he is, you cannot know who you are. When Jesus turned to his disciples and asked, "Who do you say that I am?" he was not seeking their opinion. He was revealing the mirror of the soul. For in truth, every man defines God according to the image that lives within himself. If he sees God as distant, it is because he has exiled his own spirit. If he sees God as wrathful, it is because he has not yet forgiven his own heart. The question was not information, it was initiation. I saw in the records the moment when he asked it, the sun low over the stones of Caesarea Philippi, the idols of men carved in every corner, and the air heavy with the smoke of false worship. And there in that place filled with names and images of gods made by human hands, he asked the one question that dissolves them all, "Who do you say that I am?" And the silence that followed was the same silence that falls in every soul before truth is spoken. The disciples had heard the crowd say he was Elijah, or John the Baptist, or a prophet returned, echoes of others, reflections of the past. But then Peter spoke, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And in that moment something eternal moved through him, not borrowed faith, but revelation. Because the Father does not reveal himself through books or tradition, but through direct illumination. This is how the divine communicates. Spirit recognizing spirit, light calling to light. The name Peter spoke was not learned from others, it was remembered from within. And that is the secret of identity. No one discovers God by description, only by recognition. When Peter said, "You are the Christ," he was also awakening to his own essence, the Christ within the human, the divine pattern within the mortal form. And Jesus answered, "Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven," meaning no external teaching can grant that knowledge, only inner awareness. This is the mystery every soul must face, that what you call God is not separate from what you are, but the highest vibration of what you may become. And yet, through centuries, men have traded this living truth for doctrines and names. They have built religions to define the undefinable. Forgetting that definition freezes what should flow. The Christ never asked for titles. He asked for relationship. He asked, "Who do you say I am?" Because your answer reveals the measure of your vision, and that vision determines the shape of your destiny. If you call him a prophet, you will hear only words. If you call him a teacher, you will follow rules. But if you call him the Son of the living God, life itself will awaken in you, for every perception you hold becomes the seed of your becoming. This is the hidden law that governs spiritual growth. As the soul conceives God, so it manifests its own potential. I have seen it in countless readings. A man who believes God is cruel lives under invisible judgment. A woman who believes God is indifferent lives in despair. But one who sees God as love radiates healing without even speaking, because what you worship you become. When Jesus asked, "Who do you say that I am?" he was offering them the choice of identity, not his, but theirs. Would they see him through fear or through revelation? Would they name him as history or as living presence? Would they stand before the eternal and recognize themselves as reflections of his image? And this question did not end in that ancient city. It follows every generation. It follows you in the quiet of night, when belief and doubt wrestle, when prayer feels like silence. He still asks, "Who do you say that I am?" And your answer changes everything, not in heaven, but in your consciousness. For heaven responds according to the vibration you hold. If you answer with uncertainty, the light flickers. If you answer with conviction, the gates open. If you answer with surrender, you and the divine become one current. This is the law of resonance that binds all creation, like attracts, like awareness answers awareness, love recognizes love, and through that recognition, the world itself begins to shift. I once saw in the records that every soul, at some point, stands before that same question, not in words, but as an inner confrontation. It comes when the old patterns of belief collapse, when the outer teacher fades and the inner voice begins to rise. Then you hear it. not with ears, but with the vibration of truth itself. Who do you say that I am? And in that instant, all pretense falls away. Your opinions, your borrowed theology, your inherited faith, all vanish, and only experience remains. In that moment, every answer is weighed not by grammar, but by vibration. Some speak of him as memory, and the energy remains flat. Others speak of him as reality, and the light within them flares. I have seen how the question itself becomes a fire, consuming falsehood and revealing essence. Because the Christ does not ask to learn about you, he asks so you may learn about yourself. Every soul answers differently, and each answer marks a stage of awakening. The child says he is Savior. The student says he is Master. The awakened one says he is I am, not in pride, but in union. For when the soul finally perceives that the life in Jesus and the life in itself are of one source, the illusion of separation dissolves, and the kingdom begins within. This was the revelation Peter touched for a breath, but humanity has yet to live, because the mind fears such nearness. It prefers distance. It prefers a God to worship, rather than a God to become like. But the Christ came not to be admired. He came to be realized. He came to awaken the divine identity dormant in mankind. That is why he said, "Greater works than these shall you do." For he knew that once a soul remembers its origin, it remembers its authority. The same life that moved through him moves through all. And when he asked, "Who do you say that I am?" he was unlocking that remembrance. He was calling forth creators from among believers, co-heirs of the divine current. The world changed in that question, because it revealed that the boundary between heaven and earth lies only in perception. To answer it rightly is to open that boundary forever. I tell you, the question still stands before you. It is not distant. It is waiting in your next breath. Who do you say that? He is not what do you believe, not what do others tell you, but what truth burns in your heart when you look into the face of the infinite. Your answer is not spoken once. It is spoken every day by the way you live, by what you choose, by what you love, by how you see others. For the words, "You are the Christ," are meaningless until they echo in action. Peter's confession built a church, but your confession builds a world. For identity is creation, and the name you give the divine shapes the world that answers you. So listen within, answer carefully. For the question that began by the sea still divides light from shadow, and your response determines which side of eternity you walk in this very moment. I beheld the question of fear as one of the oldest shadows upon the soul of man. For when I was shown the records of the earth, I saw that every war, every betrayal, every sickness of heart began first as a tremor in the unseen world, a thought that said, "I am alone," and from that lie all calamity was born. For fear is the forgetting of unity, the blindness of the soul that no longer remembers its source. And as I watched, I saw upon the waters of Galilee the form of the Master asleep in the stern of a boat, and around him the storm rising like the breath of panic itself. The waves lashed, the wind howled, the hearts of men trembled, and they cried out, "Lord, do you not care that we perish?" And he awoke, not as one startled, but as one who had never truly slept, and his voice broke through the roar of the tempest. "Why are you so afraid?" In that single question lay the judgment of all ages, for he did not ask about the storm, he asked about the heart. And I saw in that moment that the storm was but the reflection of their inner chaos. The sea obeyed their fear until it met his peace. And when his calm rose, creation remembered its order. So it is with every soul. The world outside bends to the vibration within. I have seen this truth unfold in the lives of countless men and women, that what they call bad fortune is only the echo of the tremor they hold in secret. For the universe is not cruel, it is responsive. It answers the tone of your belief. And belief ruled by fear calls forth confusion, as surely as faith calls forth harmony. This is the hidden law that governs both spirit and matter. I have seen it written in light across the etheric planes, that thought is causation and feeling is magnet, and thus what you fear you invite, what you trust you build. When the Master asked, Why are you so afraid? He was not rebuking them for cowardice, but awakening them to power. For he knew that the storm they faced was the manifestation of divided faith. He slept because his consciousness was one with the law. He feared nothing because he remembered everything. And that is the secret lost to mankind. When man forgets his oneness with God, he becomes prey to every appearance of danger. Yet when he remembers that life itself is God moving through him, no storm can prevail. Fear dissolves not by will but by awareness, by knowing that you and the Creator are not two, but one breath wearing different forms. And this truth I learned again and again through many lives, that fear is not an enemy to be slain. It is a teacher showing where faith has yet to take root. When fear rises, it is the signal that you have believed in a world apart from God. And belief creates experience, so the task is not to fight the fear, but to see through it, to look into its face and say, you have no life in yourself, for all life belongs to the eternal. And as those words take hold, the vibration changes, the storm ceases, the mind becomes still, and the soul remembers its dominion. Even the cells of the body begin to harmonize, for fear poisons them as surely as faith revives them. I was once given a vision of the human aura, how it darkens when fear grips the heart, shrinking and twisting upon itself, cutting off the current of vitality that flows from the higher self. But when the man remembers God and breathes in calm, the light expands, golden and blue, and the forces of healing begin their work. This is not imagination, it is law, the same law by which Jesus calmed the storm. For nature and soul are reflections of one principle, and when the principle is recognized, order returns. He did not beg the winds to cease. He commanded because he was aligned. He spoke not from hope, but from knowledge, and that knowledge is the birthright of every soul. The Christ in you has the same authority, if only you will cease worshipping fear as real. For fear is faith inverted. It is belief in the power of destruction instead of creation, and whatever you believe in long enough becomes the world you meet. Thus he asked, why are you so afraid? As a call to awaken the divine faith within, faith not as emotion but as perception, the seeing of truth even when the senses scream falsehood. When I read the records of souls who overcame, I saw that their lives did not grow peaceful because the world changed, but because their vision did. They learned to see through the storm to the stillness behind it, and in that stillness they heard the same question whispered again and again, why are you so afraid? Until at last they answered, I am not. And from that moment the pattern of their lives shifted, for fear cannot dwell in the same house as recognition. It is driven out by remembrance, and remembrance is the essence of salvation. The Christ came not to remove fear by miracle, but to remove forgetfulness by revelation, to remind you that you are not a creature lost in chaos, but a spirit clothed in matter, a wave upon the sea of divine mind, and no wave can be separate from the ocean that bears it. So when you tremble at the tempests of this world, know that you are trembling at illusions made solid by your own faith in them. I tell you plainly, what you fear most is nothing but your own creative power, misused. You imagine loss and it appears. You imagine danger and it forms. For imagination is the mold of matter, and the Christ came to redeem imagination itself, to turn it once more toward truth. He said, peace, be still, not only to the sea, but to the mind of man. And those words are still alive, still carrying the same vibration, if you will, but speak them within. Not as plea, but as command born of union, you will find the same stillness descend, the same light unfold, and you will know what he knew. That fear was never real. It was only the shadow cast by the forgetting of light. In my meditations, I have often felt that same voice ask me, Edgar, why are you afraid to trust what you already know? And when I ceased to answer with excuses, revelation came, quiet as dawn, showing that every fear I had ever known was a mirror of unbelief, an echo of separation. And as I released it, the heart grew wide, and the current of peace flowed through me like living fire. This is the inheritance of all who remember, that perfect love casteth out fear, not by effort, but by presence. When you dwell in love, fear has no breath to live. and the outer storms, whether of men or of fate. Obey the calm that reigns within. So I say to you, as the Master said to them, awaken from your terror. Remember who commands the sea. For it is not the wind that rules your destiny, but the Spirit that speaks through you. And if you will but stand in that remembrance, fear will fall away like mist before the morning Sunday. To the cripple at Bethesda, he said, do you want to be healed? Astonishing, for the answer seemed obvious. Yet many cling to illness because it gives identity. Healing demands responsibility. It ends the excuse. When Jesus commands, rise, take up your bed and walk, the power moves only when the will consents. In the language of the soul, faith is motion. The moment you rise inwardly, the body and the world follow. I beheld the question of fear as one of the oldest shadows upon the soul of man, for when I was shown the records of the earth, I saw that every war, every betrayal, every sickness of heart began first as a tremor in the unseen world, a thought that said, I am alone, and from that lie all calamity was born, for fear is the forgetting of unity, the blindness of the soul that no longer remembers its source. And as I watched, I saw upon the waters of Galilee the form of the Master asleep in the stern of a boat, and around him the storm rising like the breath of panic itself. The waves lashed, the wind howled, the hearts of men trembled, and they cried out, Lord, do you not care that we perish? And he awoke, not as one startled, but as one who had never truly slept, and his voice broke through the roar of the tempest. Why are you so afraid? In that single question lay the judgment of all ages, for he did not ask about the storm, he asked about the heart. And I saw in that moment that the storm was but the reflection of their inner chaos. The sea obeyed their fear until it met his peace, and when his calm rose, creation remembered its order. So it is with every soul. The world outside bends to the vibration within. I have seen this truth unfold in the lives of countless men and women, that what they call bad fortune is only the echo of the tremor they hold in secret. For the universe is not cruel. It is responsive. It answers the tone of your belief, and belief ruled by fear calls forth confusion, as surely as faith calls forth harmony. This is the hidden law that governs both spirit and matter. I have seen it written in light across the etheric planes. That thought is causation, and feeling is magnet, and thus what you fear you invite, what you trust you build. When the Master asked, why are you so afraid? He was not rebuking them for cowardice, but awakening them to power, for he knew that the storm they faced was the manifestation of divided faith. He slept because his consciousness was one with the law. He feared nothing because he remembered everything. And that is the secret lost to mankind. When man forgets his oneness with God, he becomes prey to every appearance of danger. Yet when he remembers that life itself is God moving through him, no storm can prevail. Fear dissolves not by will but by awareness, by knowing that you and the Creator are not two, but one breath wearing different forms. And this truth I learned again and again through many lives. That fear is not an enemy to be slain. It is a teacher showing where faith has yet to take root. When fear rises, it is the signal that you have believed in a world apart from God, and belief creates experience. So the task is not to fight the fear, but to see through it, to look into its face and say, you have no life in yourself, for all life belongs to the eternal. And as those words take hold, the vibration changes, the storm ceases, the mind becomes still, and the soul remembers its dominion. Even the cells of the body begin to harmonize, for fear poisons them as surely as faith revives them. I was once given a vision of the human aura, how it darkens when fear grips the heart, shrinking and twisting upon itself, cutting off the current of vitality that flows from the higher self. But when the man remembers God and breathes in calm, the light expands, golden and blue, and the forces of healing begin their work. This is not imagination. It is law, the same law by which Jesus calmed the storm. For nature and soul are reflections of one principle, and when the principle is recognized, order returns. He did not beg the winds to cease. He commanded because he was aligned. He spoke not from hope, but from knowledge. and that knowledge is the birthright of every soul. The Christ in you has the same authority if only you will cease worshipping fear as real, for fear is faith inverted. It is belief in the power of destruction instead of creation, and whatever you believe in long enough becomes the world you meet. Thus he asked, "Why are you so afraid?" as a call to awaken the divine faith within. Faith not as emotion, but as perception, the seeing of truth, even when the senses scream falsehood. When I read the records of souls who overcame, I saw that their lives did not grow peaceful because the world changed, but because their vision did. They learned to see through the storm to the stillness behind it, and in that stillness they heard the same question whispered again and again, "Why are you so afraid?" Until at last they answered, "I am not." And from that moment the pattern of their lives shifted, for fear cannot dwell in the same house as recognition. It is driven out by remembrance, and remembrance is the essence of salvation. The Christ came not to remove fear by miracle, but to remove forgetfulness by revelation, to remind you that you are not a creature lost in chaos, but a spirit clothed in matter, a wave upon the sea of divine mind, and no wave can be separate from the ocean that bears it. So when you tremble at the tempests of this world, know that you are trembling at illusions made solid by your own faith in them. I tell you plainly, what you fear most is nothing but your own creative power, misused. You imagine loss, and it appears. You imagine danger, and it forms, for imagination is the mold of matter, and the Christ came to redeem imagination itself, to turn it once more toward truth. He said, "Peace, be still," not only to the sea, but to the mind of man. And those words are still alive, still carrying the same vibration, if you will but speak them within. Not as plea, but as command born of union, you will find the same stillness descend, the same light unfold, and you will know what he knew, that fear was never real. It was only the shadow cast by the forgetting of light. In my meditations, I have often felt that same voice ask me, "Edgar, why are you afraid to trust what you already know?" And when I ceased to answer with excuses, revelation came, quiet as dawn, showing that every fear I had ever known was a mirror of unbelief, an echo of separation. And as I released it, the heart grew wide, and the current of peace flowed through me like living fire. This is the inheritance of all who remember, that perfect love casteth out fear not by effort, but by presence. When you dwell in love, fear has no breath to live, and the outer storms, whether of men or of fate, obey the calm that reigns within. So I say to you, as the Master said to them, "Awaken from your terror. Remember who commands the sea, for it is not the wind that rules your destiny, but the Spirit that speaks through you. And if you will but stand in that remembrance, fear will fall away like mist before the morning Sunday. What does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul?" Every age builds its towers of success and calls them blessing, yet eternity measures wealth in consciousness, not coin. Cayce's readings tell that the soul's vibration is the only treasure carried beyond death. So ask yourself, what are you trading your vibration for? Fame, approval, comfort, dust, all of it. Only what is given in love survives the tomb. The question of value pierces deeper than desire, for it weighs the soul against eternity. When the Master asked, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" he was not speaking of wealth alone. He was naming the hidden transaction that takes place in every human heart, the constant exchange of spirit for shadow, of essence for possession. I saw in the records that this question was spoken not to condemn riches, but to expose the blindness that follows them, because man does not fall by gold or by power. He falls by forgetfulness, by trading what is eternal for what rusts and perishes. And the Christ knew that every civilization would repeat the same error, calling comfort blessing, calling accumulation success, while the inner kingdom decays unnoticed. The question of value is the question of vision. What do you see as real? What do you measure as gain? If you believe that what can be counted is worth more than what can be felt, then you have already begun to lose your soul. And the soul does not die in a single act. It erodes. It fades each time you choose appearance over truth. I have seen this erosion in the records of countless lives. merchants who bartered away compassion for gain, rulers who exchanged peace for control, lovers who traded honesty for approval, each believing they had profited, yet each standing in the end before the same emptiness, for the world cannot fill what it did not create. Every man is born with two accounts, one of matter and one of spirit, and the balance between them determines his peace. To gain the world is to master the outer law of exchange. To lose the soul is to forget the inner one. The Christ spoke to awaken memory of that law, to remind man that the soul's value cannot be measured in time's currency. What you store in barns will burn. What you guard in heart will rise beyond death. I have seen souls who died with nothing and entered light as kings, and others who died with kingdoms and wandered in darkness, unable to remember their own name. Because identity is not built by ownership but by alignment. When Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also," he was revealing the axis of creation. The heart is the magnet of destiny. It draws to itself the realm that matches its love. If your treasure is in heaven, meaning consciousness, you will live in expansion. But if your treasure is in things, you will shrink into them, your awareness confined to decay, and when decay consumes them, you will believe that you have lost everything. Yet nothing eternal was ever lost, only the illusion of ownership. The soul never possesses. It participates, it flows, it gives and receives as breath. The mind that hoards forgets the rhythm of life, and stagnation follows. This is why greed breeds anxiety, for hoarding violates the design of the universe. Nothing in nature holds without sharing. Even the sun gives itself until it burns, and still it shines. Man fears loss because he misidentifies value. He clings to form and ignores essence. To gain the world is to live outwardly successful and inwardly bankrupt. To lose the soul is to stop feeling the divine pulse beneath all things. The Christ asked this question not as moral warning, but as spiritual diagnosis. He saw how easily the senses deceive, how easily man confuses quantity with fulfillment. I remember seeing in the Akashic field the image of a merchant weighed down by gold, his aura darkened, the light within him flickering, and beside him a beggar whose heart glowed like dawn. And I understood that wealth without purpose is gravity. It pulls the spirit downward into density. But when wealth becomes channel of blessing, it reverses the current. It becomes light again, for value is not what you hold, but what flows through you. Even in your thought, if you think only of yourself, your mind grows narrow. But when you think of others, the current widens, and peace follows. This is the mathematics of heaven. What you give multiplies. What you withhold diminishes. And this applies not only to coin, but to time, attention, forgiveness. The Christ did not condemn material things. He condemned identification with them. He warned not against having, but against becoming what you have. When you are defined by possessions, you are imprisoned by them, and the cell door is built of your own desire. I tell you truly, there is no tragedy greater than a soul that forgets its origin for the sake of appearance. When man believes that matter sustains him, he cuts himself from the source that truly does, and all his striving becomes anxiety. This is why nations collapse, though rich in resource, why men despair, though surrounded by comfort. They have mistaken means for end, and the question of value remains unanswered. The Christ voice echoes through every age, asking, "What have you gained?" For he knows that gain measured in fear is loss disguised. The real profit of the soul is consciousness, to awaken, to expand, to align, to love. These are the treasures that follow you, beyond the veil. All else returns to dust. I remember a vision shown to me of a great market filled with light, where souls exchanged their deeds for lessons. The humble glowed, the proud appeared dim, and I heard a voice say, "The currency of eternity is intention, not achievement." And I understood that even a single act of mercy outweighed a lifetime of accumulation, because mercy aligns with divine will, while greed isolates. This is the spiritual economy that Jesus revealed, unseen yet absolute. Every thought, word, and deed carries vibration, and vibration is destiny. What you invest in attention becomes your eternity. I have watched souls rise to higher realms, not because they knew doctrine, but because they lived with generosity. For giving is the act that mirrors the Creator. The universe itself is one eternal outpouring, and every soul that imitates that rhythm partakes in divine abundance. So when the Master asked, "What does it profit a man?" he was not condemning ambition, he was recalibrating it, teaching that the only ambition worth keeping is alignment with God. The rest is labor for ashes. Men chase crowns of metal and lose the crown of light. They seek applause and lose inner silence. They win arguments and lose understanding. And the day comes when all their trophies cannot buy a moment of peace. I have seen that hour when death removes the illusion of possession and the soul realizes that it owns nothing but what it has become, and what it has become is measured only by love. Then the question rings again, what was the profit? And the soul answers with its own vibration, heavy or radiant, depending on the value it pursued. I tell you, the wise man measures worth not by cost, but by consequence. He asks, does this choice expand or contract the light within me? And by that measure he lives. For he knows that to gain the world is fleeting, but to know God is infinite. And that is the true arithmetic of existence. The Christ's question remains the balance point of every decision. It weighs gold against grace, noise against stillness, appearance against essence, and the scale never lies. The soul that remembers its value cannot be bought. The soul that forgets will sell itself for dust. And when all is said and done, only one treasure endures, the awareness that you are one with the source that gives all things, and that nothing the world offers can compare with that remembrance. Why do you call me Lord and not do what I say? Obedience is not submission but alignment, magnetism between human will and divine law. When your deeds echo your prayers, the soul hums in harmony. When they differ, dissonance tears the fabric of peace. The foundation that stands through every storm is simple: to live what you already know to be true. The question of obedience is the question of alignment. For the Master said, "Why do you call me Lord and not do what I say?" And in those words the hidden hypocrisy of mankind was exposed. Because every age has worshipped his name yet ignored his law, men sing praises to the divine while resisting the order through which the divine moves. They seek miracles but defy discipline. They pray for peace but plant division, and so they live in contradiction, expecting harmony while generating discord. I saw in the records that obedience is not submission but resonance. It is the tuning of the soul to the key of heaven. For all of creation obeys this law. The stars move in rhythm, the tides answer the moon, the seed yields to season. Only man, gifted with choice, dares to defy alignment, and that defiance is what he later named suffering. Jesus knew this. He saw that the sickness of humanity was disconnection, a will divided against itself. And he spoke this question as cure, not condemnation. Why do you call me Lord? Meaning, why do you claim to believe in truth while refusing to live by it? For faith is not a confession of lips. It is a consistency of vibration. To call him Lord is to place the self under divine order. Yet man calls and keeps command for himself. He bows with the body while the mind remains sovereign, and thus the prayer becomes hollow sound. The word Lord means law. It means principle. It means alignment with the eternal pattern. To disobey it, it is to fracture your own foundation. I have seen in the records how souls bind themselves by dissonance, saying one thing, thinking another, doing a third, and in that division the power of spirit leaks away until nothing remains but form without life. Obedience restores wholeness. It gathers the scattered energies of will and binds them to purpose. It transforms belief into embodiment. For every law of heaven is fulfilled only through action. The Christ did not come to be adored, he came to be followed. His words were not decoration for temples, but instructions for transfiguration. And yet men have made devotion easier than discipline. They prefer emotion to order, for emotion flatters the ego while obedience humbles it. The ego rebels against obedience because it fears disappearance. But what disappears in obedience is not identity, it is separation, and what remains is harmony. The Master obeyed even unto death, not from weakness but from wisdom. He knew that surrender to divine will is not loss but alignment with infinite power. Every miracle he performed flowed from that obedience. For law responds to itself. When the human will harmonizes with divine intent, creation bends to serve it. I have seen this law written in light through every plane of being. Obedience is magnetism, disobedience is resistance. When you obey the higher law, the lower follows. When you defy it, both realms rebel, the body suffers, the mind confuses, the spirit dims, and still man wonders why peace eludes him. I tell you truly, peace is the natural condition of alignment. It cannot be prayed into existence. It must be lived into existence. The Christ said, "If you love me, keep my commandments," not to impose rules, but to reveal that love without obedience is sentiment without structure. And the universe is built upon structure. Every vibration seeks order. Even chaos eventually returns to balance. But man delays that return by clinging to preference. He chooses pleasure over purpose and calls it freedom. Yet true freedom is not doing as you please. It is being unbound by false desire. Obedience is not slavery. It is mastery. For he who obeys divine law commands all lesser laws. I have seen healers who failed because they prayed without obedience. They asked for health but defied harmony. They spoke light but lived in resentment, and the energy they invoked dissolved into contradiction. The Christ obeyed love in every breath. Therefore his words carried authority. Authority is born not from title but from congruence. When word, thought, and act align, the universe listens. The same law holds for every soul. When your speech matches your belief and your belief your deed, the current of power flows unhindered. But when any part divides, the current fragments and life becomes struggle. That is the secret of divine strength. Integrity of vibration, to be single in purpose as the eye is single to light. Obedience is the training by which the soul learns to see without distortion. It is the discipline that transforms impulse into intention. I remember a vision shown to me where souls were standing before the river of light. Some moved with it, others fought against it. Those who moved were radiant, effortless, carried. Those who resisted were weary, thrashing. Yet the river did not change, only their response did. And I heard the voice say, "Obedience is not submission to flow, it is recognition of it. Once you recognize it, resistance ends and joy begins." I understood then that disobedience is ignorance. It is blindness to rhythm. Like a man who steps out of tune and blames the music for chaos, so the Master's question remains ever living. Why do you call me Lord and not do what I say? It confronts not only hypocrisy but separation. It demands coherence. To obey is to unite will and truth, thought and deed, heaven and earth, and from that union power flows. I have seen simple men who obeyed love without question perform greater works than scholars who knew every doctrine, because obedience opens channels that knowledge alone cannot. Knowledge informs, obedience transforms, for the act embodies the word and brings spirit into matter. The Christ was the perfect image of this law, the word made flesh, truth enacted, and every follower who walks in obedience becomes part of that same embodiment. That is the mystery of faith in action, to be living Scripture, not by quoting but by becoming. Yet mankind still seeks shortcuts, praying for miracles while clinging to contradiction, calling him Lord but obeying fear, serving two masters and wondering why their prayers echo unanswered. I tell you, the universe cannot be fooled. It mirrors your vibration, not your vocabulary. It listens not to what you say but to what you live. And if your deeds defy your declarations, your own energy cancels itself. But when obedience becomes your nature, words are unnecessary. Creation responds before you speak. That is how the Christ healed. His every act an extension of divine will, so seamless that command and fulfillment were one. This is the power offered to every soul that aligns. But few accept, for obedience demands surrender of control, and the ego trembles at surrender, yet what it calls control is bondage, and what it calls surrender is liberation. I have seen in the records the souls who reached peace did not strive. They obeyed, they listened, they yielded to the inner voice. That is the same spirit that moved through the Christ, and that voice still speaks within every man, saying, "If you call me Lord, then live as though I am. Let your deeds bear witness to your devotion. Let your silence speak more truth than your prayers." And you will find that obedience is not burden but rhythm, not command but communion. For in that state you and the divine move as one current, and in that union all labor becomes rest, all striving becomes joy, all distance disappears. Mercy is not softness. It is the vibration of divine law fulfilled through love. When the Master lifted his gaze to the trembling woman cast before him by the scribes and Pharisees, he did not see a sinner to be condemned, but a soul trapped in the cycle of accusation. They came armed with stones and scripture, believing that judgment was righteousness. Yet judgment without mercy is blindness, and blindness pretending to be holy becomes cruelty. I remember how the light around that moment shimmered when he bent to write in the dust. The symbols he traced were not words, but frequencies, records of each accuser's own transgression. And one by one they felt the weight of truth in their hearts, heavier than any stone in their hands, until silence swallowed the courtyard and only the wind moved. Then he spoke, "Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone." And the stones fell unused. Because none could stand before the mirror of their own soul, this was not leniency, it was revelation. For every act of mercy reveals that law is never broken by forgiveness, but completed by it. Judgment separates. Mercy restores. Judgment closes the circuit of pain. Mercy opens the current of renewal. I have seen through the records that every soul carries within it both judge and accused, the self that condemns and the self that suffers. And the war between them is what mankind calls guilt. This is the true prison, not the consequence of sin, but the refusal to release it. The Christ came to dissolve that prison, not by abolishing justice, but by fulfilling it through grace. For in the divine pattern, balance is maintained, not by punishment, but by transformation. What is repented is rewritten. What is forgiven is transmuted. The energy of sin is not erased. It is elevated. And this is what the world forgets. It thinks forgiveness means forgetting, but in truth, forgiveness is remembering who you were before the wound. It is restoring identity to its divine design. The Christ said to the woman, "Neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more." And I felt in that utterance the entire law of cause and effect turned luminous. He did not excuse her act, he revealed her freedom. For when guilt dissolves, consciousness rises, and a risen mind no longer repeats the pattern that bound it. Condemnation chains the past to the present. Mercy cuts the link and gives the soul back its wings. I have seen men bound for lifetimes by their own unforgiveness, begging heaven for relief, while clutching resentment like treasure, and heaven cannot intervene until they release their own chains. For divine law answers the tone of your heart, not the words of your mouth. And a heart filled with judgment cannot receive mercy. It can only mirror what it gives. This is why the Christ warned, "With the measure you use, it will be measured back to you," because the universe is echo. Every thought projected returns multiplied. If you speak condemnation, it will return as despair. If you speak compassion, it will return as peace. This is not reward or punishment. It is resonance. And resonance is justice more perfect than any human court. I remember once in deep trance seeing a soul surrounded by shadows, crying that God had abandoned it. Yet those shadows were the forms of its own thoughts, words of hatred, judgments unrepented, circling back as teachers, not enemies. And when at last that soul whispered forgiveness even for itself, the shadows melted into light. This is how the Christ redeems. Not by decree, but by awakening, understanding. The woman caught in sin was each of us, exposed before the light of truth. naked in conscience, and his question echoes still, "Where are your accusers?" For when divine love enters, accusation ceases, the voice of shame falls silent, the torment of self-hatred dissolves, and only the stillness of being remains. That stillness is the true temple, where God and soul meet without words. I have seen, through the Akashic field, that the moment a man forgives himself, his energy changes shape, the dark bands around the heart release, the current brightens, and what was once karmic weight becomes luminous strength. This is the alchemy of mercy. It turns the lead of guilt into the gold of wisdom. Every fall becomes a lesson, every wound a window through which grace enters, and yet humanity clings to punishment, as if suffering could restore order. But suffering without understanding only repeats itself. True justice is the awakening of consciousness, not the infliction of pain. The Christ knew this. He bore the judgment of the world to end its illusion, showing that love is stronger than law because love fulfills law. When he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," he was speaking not only of his executioners, but of all mankind, blind to consequence, deaf to truth, yet still redeemable through awareness. That prayer was not for pity, but for transformation. For every forgiven act releases light into the collective field, easing the burden of all. This is why mercy multiplies itself across generations. The forgiven become forgivers, and the echo of compassion replaces the echo of judgment. I tell you truly, every time you choose to release another from blame, you loosen the chain that once bound your own soul. Every time you stop rehearsing injury, you reclaim power. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is mastery of energy. For to forgive is to reclaim authorship of vibration. No longer reacting, you become creator again, and the universe bends to your tone. This is the path the Christ demonstrated, the path of sovereign mercy. I have walked with souls who could not forgive themselves for what they did in other lives, crimes, betrayals, even deaths caused by their own hand, and the law did not punish them. It invited them to understand, to return and restore balance through love. That is karma in its purest form, not vengeance but education. Each life a lesson in remembering the unity beneath division, and once that unity is seen, the compulsion to judge disappears. For how can one limb condemn another? How can one breath accuse the next? The Christ saw all men as parts of one body, and that vision is what made his mercy infinite. He judged no one because he understood everyone, and understanding is the true end of judgment. I have learned through years of reading souls that sin is simply ignorance of connection. Forgiveness is the restoration of sight, and mercy is the light by which that sight returns. When you forgive, you align with the same current that flowed through him that day in the temple, the current that silences accusers, dissolves shame, and restores the divine pattern in every being. The woman left that place not as sinner, but as student of grace, carrying within her the memory of love stronger than fear, and though her name was not written, her vibration remains in the field as witness to what mercy truly means. So the Master's question lingers still, "Where are your accusers?" And I hear it even now within my own silence, for each time I judge myself, I stand again in that courtyard until I remember that no one remains to throw the stone, not even God. And in that remembrance, the dust of guilt falls away, and I stand free, radiant, uncondemned, restored to the law of love that governs all worlds. Worry is faith reversed. It is prayer offered to fear. The Master asked, "Why do you worry about what you shall eat or wear?" Not because hunger or need are illusions, but because he knew the real famine is of trust. I saw through the records that worry drains the soul's current as surely as a leak drains a vessel. It creates motion without progress, sound without power, thought without creation. And the Christ asked this question not to shame men, but to free them from the tyranny of illusion. For worry is the mind believing it can preserve life by imagining control, yet every atom of breath proves that control belongs to God. Worry is the denial of divine order, the soul forgetting that its source is not circumstance. The lilies of the field do not toil, yet they are clothed in radiance. The birds of the air do not plan, yet they are fed. And man, created in the image of God, still doubts his provision. This is the root of his suffering. He has learned to think without remembering, to calculate without faith, to multiply fear into form, until anxiety becomes his religion. I have seen in the Akashic field how each thought of worry darkens the aura, compressing the flow of light, and how gratitude instantly restores its rhythm, for gratitude is the antidote to fear. It is the remembrance that everything essential has already been given. The Christ said, "Your Father knows what you need before you ask," meaning that divine intelligence is not waiting for your panic to act. It moves through law, precise, exact, unhurried. But man's impatience blinds him. He believes delay is denial, and in that misperception he begins to doubt. The moment doubt enters, the channel narrows. Energy that once flowed freely becomes stagnant, and life mirrors that stagnation. This is why so many labor endlessly yet feel empty. They have substituted effort for trust, motion for movement. They run from lack but never toward faith. Worry disguises itself as responsibility, but true responsibility is obedience to order, and order begins in stillness. I have seen that those who trust deeply require less force. Their lives move in synchronicity. Provision comes not by demand but by resonance, for trust emits a frequency that draws supply, while worry repels it. Fear is contraction, faith expansion. One shuts the gate, the other opens it. This is not metaphor, it is physics of spirit. The Christ understood that consciousness itself determines circumstance when he said, "Seek first the kingdom, and all these things shall be added." He was not offering comfort, he was describing law. The kingdom is not a place but a state, awareness aligned with divine intelligence. When you dwell there, matter arranges itself around your vibration, not through magic, but through order. Every field of energy responds to the pattern of thought that governs it. If your mind holds worry, you reproduce disorder. If your heart holds peace, creation follows its rhythm. Thus, the command not to worry is not moral advice. It is instruction in creative law. Yet men have forgotten this. They think of faith as emotion rather than architecture. They wait for feeling instead of building through discipline. I have watched souls pray for abundance with their mouths while their minds broadcast scarcity, and the two signals cancel each other, for the universe answers tone, not words. This is why the Master's question was surgical. Why do you worry? He could see that fear is always anchored in misconception, the belief that you are separate, unsupported, abandoned in a hostile world. But that belief is the first lie ever spoken. In truth, you are surrounded by intelligence that knows your need before the need arises. The Father within you is not distant. He is the law moving through your pulse. Each breath is evidence of care. That each dawn proof of renewal. The only real poverty is forgetfulness. I remember a vision shown to me in prayer. A man surrounded by overflowing fields, yet clutching his stomach in hunger, he kept repeating, "There is not enough," until the fields turned barren before his eyes. Then he wept and said, "Why did you take it from me?" And a voice replied, "You starved yourself with belief. The image burned into my heart as truth. Worry is not protection. It is prophecy. It calls into being the very lack it fears, for thought is seed, and fear is fertile ground. When Jesus said, "Take no thought for tomorrow," he was not commanding recklessness. He was liberating man from self-imposed slavery. Worry lives in time. Faith lives in eternity. To live in faith is to step outside the tyranny of the future, to stand in the now where God provides without delay. I have seen that souls who dwell in present awareness radiate a calm that magnetizes solution, while those trapped in projection repel even help offered to them, because fear closes every door that faith would open. The universe speaks through rhythm, and worry is dissonance. It interrupts the harmony of cause and effect. I tell you truly, the moment you stop rehearsing disaster, the law begins to rearrange reality to reflect peace, not by favor, but by resonance. Man prays for miracles, yet feeds his mind with fear, and wonders why heaven is silent, but heaven cannot override what free will sustains. If you choose fear, law fulfills fear. If you choose faith, law fulfills faith. The Christ came to teach this mastery, to show that heaven is not reward but alignment. The anxious soul prays for control. The faithful soul surrenders, and in surrender discovers that everything sought was already waiting. Worry is illusion of ownership, the false belief that you sustain your own life, but you do not sustain even your heartbeat, nor command your breath. The same intelligence that keeps the stars in orbit governs your blood. So why imagine that provision depends on panic? The truth is that worry offends divine order, for it accuses God of negligence. Yet every blade of grass rebukes that lie. Existence itself proves care. I have read lives where worry aged the body faster than years, where constant fear of loss created disease in the organs meant to trust. The stomach twisted, the heart tightened, the lungs shortened, each cell reacting to the vibration of mistrust. But when peace returned, the body healed itself, for the body obeys the soul's belief. Faith is health, worry is corrosion. Every physician in spirit knows this. They see it written in the aura before it appears in flesh. And so the Master's question echoes not as rebuke, but as diagnosis. Why do you worry? It is an invitation to examine what you truly worship, for whatever occupies your thought is your God. If fear governs your days, then fear is your deity. If trust governs, then the kingdom is within you. I say this not as theory, but as witness, for I have lived both. I have tasted the bitterness of anxiety and the sweetness of surrender, and I tell you, no circumstance changed before faith did. The outer reflects the inner. Always. The law does not fail. When I released control, provision came like a tide, and I understood that faith is not belief in outcome. It is awareness of order, the realization that divine mind is never late, never blind, never absent. So the Christ's question remains, burning, necessary. Why do you worry? And until the soul can answer it in stillness, it will keep spinning in circles of its own making. But the moment it says, I trust, the circle becomes a spiral, rising, lifting, drawing the soul closer to its source. And their worry ceases forever, not because problems vanish, but because the heart has remembered who governs all things. Understanding is not memory, it is revelation. After the miracle of the loaves and fishes, the Master turned to his disciples and asked, do you still not understand? And in that question, the veil of human blindness was revealed, for men see the sign but miss the source. They taste the bread but forget the law that multiplied it. They remember the miracle, yet ignore the principle. I saw in the records that this question is one of the most piercing in all Scripture, for it separates believers from knowers, those who follow wonders from those who embody wisdom. To understand is to perceive pattern, to see that every act of divine power follows a law as precise as mathematics, but humanity prefers astonishment to comprehension. It worships effect while ignoring cause, and that is why the same miracle must be repeated in every age. Because men forget the inner science of creation, they see bread appear and call it magic. Yet the Christ was teaching vibration, showing that gratitude aligns with abundance, that faith organizes substance, that consciousness shapes matter. When he lifted his eyes to heaven and gave thanks, he was tuning frequency. His words resonated with the law of increase, and the universe obeyed. This is the secret, hidden behind every miracle. Creation expands wherever awareness affirms order. It contracts wherever fear denies it. But even those who walked beside him could not hold this truth. They saw with eyes, but not with understanding. Their minds trapped in separation, thinking in fragments. while he spoke in wholeness. So he asked, "Do you still not understand?" For he knew that miracles without comprehension breed dependency, not transformation. I have seen through the Akashic field how this same blindness continues. Souls receiving grace again and again, yet returning to worry and complaint, forgetting that the power that fed them yesterday still abides within them. Man prays for daily bread while carrying the bakery of the divine within his consciousness, unaware that his thoughts are ovens of manifestation, his emotions the fire, his faith the yeast. The Christ's question was not about intellect but alignment, for understanding is not accumulation of knowledge. It is the moment when the heart and mind vibrate at the same frequency as truth. Then the word ceases to be concept and becomes law incarnate. He asked, not because he was angry, but because he knew that ignorance prolongs suffering, misunderstanding multiplies need. Those who fail to understand live by accident instead of order, by reaction instead of creation. And the purpose of every teaching was to awaken remembrance of law. I remember being shown in vision the moment the multitude ate, each unaware that the same power that broke the bread for them was breaking within them. The divine current that multiplies atoms was pulsing through their very blood, but only one or two felt it, only those whose gratitude rose to match his own. For understanding is participation. It is entering the rhythm of divine action, not observing from distance. Man has been taught to seek miracles as proof, but the Christ performed them as lessons. Every act of power was a parable in motion. Sight to the blind meant awakening perception. Stilling the storm meant quieting the mind. Raising the dead meant reviving the forgotten self. And feeding the multitude meant teaching abundance as consciousness. Yet the crowd saw only bread. The disciples saw only provision. And thus he sighed. Do you still not understand? Because they had received evidence without insight, and evidence without insight becomes idolatry. I tell you this as one who has read the vibrations of souls across centuries. The most common blindness is not doubt, but dependence. Men rely on outer signs and forget the inner seed. They mistake the finger for the moon, the symbol for the substance. Understanding is seeing through symbol to essence, knowing that the law that multiplies bread can multiply wisdom, peace, or love by the same principle. Gratitude amplifies, fear restricts, recognition unlocks, denial closes. The Christ's every act revealed the architecture of heaven, moving through matter, and yet even his closest companions argued about loaves, worrying about lack when infinite supply stood before them. This is the tragedy of humanity, surrounded by abundance, yet living in scarcity, because consciousness refuses to remember. The mind says, I lack, and the universe mirrors it faithfully. For law does not discriminate. It simply returns what is sent. This is why understanding is salvation, not worship, not sentiment, but comprehension of divine operation. I have seen souls rise from despair the moment they grasp the law, as though chains fell away, for ignorance is bondage and awareness is deliverance. When you understand how thought forms become events, how vibration attracts its likeness, how faith organizes reality, you cease to beg and begin to create. That is what the Master longed for. Disciples who did not merely believe in him but believed as him, he said, the works I do, you shall do also. Meaning, once you understand, you will operate by the same principle, the same Father, the same law. For understanding dissolves hierarchy, it reveals unity. The Christ consciousness is not exclusive, it is blueprint, a pattern every soul may embody when awakened. I have witnessed this in my readings. When an individual finally understands that prayer is not persuasion but attunement, that God is not distant but dynamic law, their life changes instantly. Their words gain power. Their peace becomes constant. For comprehension closes the gap between heaven and earth. When the Christ asked, do you still not understand? He was inviting that closing, offering the mind freedom from dependence upon outer sign. To understand is to see that every miracle is demonstration, not exception. The universe is not occasional mercy, it is continual order. And man, being part of that order, can operate in harmony with it once his mind is purified of doubt. The key is remembrance through awareness. The heart that gives thanks multiplies what it holds. The mind that fears diminishes it. That is the entire equation of creation. Simple, yet infinite. I recall the Spirit once saying to me in meditation, understanding is the ladder by which faith ascends into knowing, and I saw light spiraling upward, each rung a realization. First belief, then trust, then comprehension, then union. At the top there was no asking, only being. That is the goal of every soul, to move from wonder to wisdom, from witness to participant. For the Creator does not desire worshippers, but co-creators, children who understand the house of their Father. This is why ignorance was called the original sin, not rebellion, but forgetfulness. The fall of consciousness from unity into confusion, and every question of the Christ was meant to restore that memory. Do you still not understand? He asks even now, through every circumstance, every repetition of lesson, until the soul finally sees that every bread broken, every storm calmed, every prayer answered was the same teaching in disguise, the same invitation to grasp law. And when the mind finally perceives the pattern, life ceases to be random, suffering loses its sting. For you no longer ask why, but how, not when, but through what principle. And that is the threshold of mastery. I tell you, the moment understanding dawns, gratitude becomes your native language, for you see that nothing was ever withheld, only misunderstood, and the Master's question becomes your own to others still wondering. Do you not yet understand? For comprehension once gained must be shared. Light multiplies by reflection, as bread by blessing. And this is the eternal law, the one he lived to reveal. Love is the final law, the axis upon which all creation turns. When the Master looked upon Peter after the darkness of denial and asked 3 times, "Do you love me?" he was not seeking reassurance. He was restoring alignment. For every fall in human history is a failure of love, and every redemption begins with its remembrance. I saw in the records that each of Peter's answers vibrated through the layers of his being, undoing the cords of guilt that bound him to shame. 3 denials, 3 confessions, each one redeeming a wound in the soul's pattern until the current of divine affection could flow unbroken again. The Christ was not counting words. He was rewiring vibration, turning fear into faith, separation into union. For love is not emotion, it is energy. It is the original substance from which spirit and matter are woven. And when love is misaligned, the entire structure trembles. This is why the Christ's final teaching was not doctrine but affection. As I have loved you, so must you love one another. For he knew that every other commandment without love becomes mechanism, hollow law without light. I have seen through the Akashic field how the universe itself is sustained by the rhythm of divine affection. Galaxies held together not only by gravity but by attraction, by sympathy of vibration. And man, being made in that image, finds wholeness only when he loves, as creation loves, selflessly, inclusively, without fear of loss. When he asked Peter, "Do you love me?" he was asking every soul, "Do you recognize yourself in me? Do you see that love is not something to give, but something to become? For only the one who becomes love can feed his sheep," meaning nurture consciousness wherever it is still asleep. This is the hidden meaning of that command. To feed is to awaken, to share the nourishment of remembrance, to restore those who have forgotten what they are. I have read in the records that many souls confuse love with sentiment, but true love is law. It is precision. It aligns with truth, regardless of comfort. The Christ love was both tenderness and power, the fire that purifies, and the water that heals. He did not love as reaction, but as revelation. He loved because he saw God in all, even in betrayal, even in ignorance. And that sight transformed everything it touched. I remember a vision shown to me of the moment when Judas approached him in the garden, the air thick with fear, the soldiers trembling though armed, and yet Jesus called him friend. In that single word, all of heaven was contained. For love does not depend on the behavior of others. It expresses the nature of the divine itself. The Christ knew that love is not granted. It is inherent. And when you live from that awareness, you become untouchable, for nothing external can diminish what is infinite. This is the secret of invincibility. To love in the midst of opposition, to bless where others curse, to remain open when the world demands closing. And I tell you, this is the hardest command of all, because the ego cannot love. It only bargains. It gives to get. But divine love is without condition. It gives because it is its nature to give, like the sun pouring light, without asking who deserves it. When he said, "Do you love me?" he was stripping away condition, demanding that Peter move from emotion to essence, from feeling to being. I have seen souls in many lives tested by this question, for love must be proven by action, not by proclamation. To love the Christ is to live his consciousness, to see the divine in every fragment, to refuse to participate in separation. And that is not weakness. It is supreme strength, for love confronts truth without fear. It embraces pain without resentment. It stands before betrayal and still says, "Father, forgive them," because love knows that ignorance is the only sin and remembrance the only redemption. This is why the Christ did not ask Peter, "Do you believe in me?" but "Do you love me?" For belief belongs to mind, and mind can waver, but love belongs to essence, and essence endures. Belief builds systems. Love builds souls. Belief divides. Love unites. Belief ends at death. Love passes through it untouched. I remember in trance hearing a voice of light say, "Love is the highest frequency, the purest form of knowing." And I saw how all colors of consciousness merged into one radiance that pulsed with life, and that light was the Christ itself, the eternal current holding all opposites in harmony, the same current that flows through every heart, though most feel it dimly, obstructed by fear. And when he asked, "Do you love me?" he was stirring that current back into flame. Peter wept because he remembered, and remembrance is the first spark of resurrection. For the soul that remembers love cannot remain in shadow. Every failure becomes fertilizer for compassion. Every wound becomes doorway. I tell you truly, the universe has no punishment, only correction through love. For love rebalances all things. It reclaims what judgment rejects. It redeems what fear condemns. Even hell is not eternal torment, but the absence of remembered love, and the moment remembrance returns, the gates open. This is the mystery hidden in those three questions, the restoration of harmony between human and divine, lower and higher self. Each "Do you love me?" reclaiming one aspect of being mind, heart, and will, until the whole man stands upright again, renewed. This pattern repeats in every life, for every soul must ascend through denial to discover forgiveness, must lose to learn to love. The Christ did not erase Peter's failure. He transformed it, turning guilt into mission, despair into purpose. And that is what love does. It recycles pain into power. I have seen countless souls healed by this same principle, one act of sincere love, undoing lifetimes of imbalance. For love collapses time. It restores all at once what effort could not in centuries. Because love is direct contact with the source, it bypasses the mechanism of karma by dissolving the separation that creates it. This is why. He said, "Love fulfills the law, for in union no correction is needed. To love perfectly is to return home, and home is not place but awareness." When he asked, "Do you love me?" he was really asking, "Do you remember where you came from? Do you remember that I and the Father are one, and you are of that same oneness?" I tell you, no soul can ascend without answering that question. For love is the ladder, not worship, not ritual, not intellect. All of these are rungs, but love is the movement itself. I have felt that current many times. In trance and in silence, it burns and soothes at once. It shows no partiality. It gives without reason. It is the breath of God made human, and when it flows unhindered, creation sings. The body heals, the mind stills, the spirit shines. That is the true miracle, the restoration of divine circulation through consciousness. Peter became a new man not because he was forgiven, but because he learned to love as he was loved. The same transformation waits for all who answer yes without condition. For to love the Christ is to awaken the Christ within. And when that awakening happens, the world begins again. I have come to understand that every question the Christ ever asked was not meant for argument, but for awakening. Each one a key placed in the hand of the soul, waiting for the courage to turn it. Across the years of my searching, through prayer, trance, and the long silence of reflection, I have seen that heaven does not speak in thunder. It speaks in questions that echo until they are lived. Who do you say that I am? Why are you afraid? Do you want to be healed? What does it profit a man? Do you love me? All of them different in sound, but one in purpose, to draw man from imitation to experience, from belief to embodiment. The revelation is not in the asking, it is in the remembering that the questioner and the answerer are one, for God does not test. He invites, he unfolds himself through your own discovery, and the moment you answer from the heart, heaven answers back through circumstance. In my own life, I have felt this law proven again and again. That thought, joined with faith, becomes creation. That surrender opens what striving cannot, and that love, once awakened, rearranges every fiber of existence. I once believed understanding was found in study, but the records have taught me otherwise. Truth is not gathered, it is revealed. When resistance ends, every question of Jesus is a mirror, showing where resistance hides fear, pride, doubt, guilt. These are the clouds that veil the inner sun. Yet behind them, the light has never dimmed. The Christ consciousness lives within every being as that light, eternal, patient, waiting for remembrance. And when remembrance comes, it feels less like learning and more like returning, as if you had always known but had forgotten how to speak it. This is the peace he promised, not the peace of avoidance, but of understanding, the kind that endures storm because it knows the storm's source. I have seen the truth of his words in the simplest things, in a child's laughter, in the rhythm of the sea, in the quiet certainty that life moves by law and not by chance. Every breath declares it, every dawn confirms it, that the universe is governed by intelligence and saturated with love. The error of man is not rebellion but forgetfulness. He forgets he is part of the order he fears, and so he prays to what he already is. The Christ came not to create worshippers, but rememberers, those who would look within and see the same flame burning. For the kingdom is not later, it is now, hidden behind the veil of perception, waiting to be recognized. I tell you truly, when the soul finally sees this, its striving ceases, its prayers turn into gratitude, its searching becomes silence, and silence becomes communion. I have tasted that communion in fleeting hours of vision, and in those moments I knew that everything, joy, sorrow, loss, birth, even death, was part of one continuous rhythm of love, seeking expression, and nothing was wasted, every question answered, every wound woven into wisdom, so that even pain itself became teacher, pointing the way home. The Christ's words live still, not in scripture alone, but in vibration, traveling through time, through the fabric of your own thought, whispering the same invitation to awaken, to remember, to become. And as I near the end of my seeing, I know now that salvation was never escape. It was recognition, to realize that the Creator and the creation are not two, that you and the source are of one life, and that love is its only language. The moment you speak it without fear, the world transforms, heaven descends, not as place but as perception, and the questions cease, for the soul has become its own answer. And in that stillness I hear again his voice, not as sound but as knowing, saying, You have always been with me, and all that I have is yours. And in that awareness, all journeys end, all seeking rests. For the light you pursued was never distant. It was the pulse within your own heart, beating in rhythm with the eternal word, silent yet speaking forever.